It's the second hour of the Bold Republic radio show, and because it's a Thursday, that means we head all the way down to Cheyenne, Wyoming. Actually, no, we head all the way out to Kansas, where Amy Edmonds, apparently, if you're out there, then you're on vacation with family. Is that right?
You got it.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you're taking time out from your vacation to have a little conversation with us. So, Amy Edmonds with Wyoming Liberty Group, and we're going to talk about, of course, if she's here, we're talking about education and the latest in education and the latest, of course, I mean, this relates mostly to Wyoming, but I don't care where you live. What Amy has to talk about relates. So what do you got for us this time?
Well, we have some breaking news hot off the press. So We've been working on, and I've talked to numerous times about this reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. Today, the U.S. Senate did vote to approve their version. They have what they call Every Child Achieves Act. We love these titles, Glenn. You and I chuckle over them all the time.
Yes, the same thing.
Version, yeah, exactly. So the Senate version has passed. The House passed theirs earlier this week called the Student Success Act, or H.R. 5. We've talked about that. So now what we have are two bills, some similarities, some differences that will go into conference and ultimately come out with one bill to go to President Obama's desk.
And get signed, I would have said. Let me ask you this. First off, just your personal opinion. So did No Child Left Behind suck or what?
It did. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, universally, yes. We've seen
universal suckage. Okay. Yeah. I'm just asking for your professional opinion there, and your professional opinion is No Child Left Behind, universal suckage. Can I quote you on that and use that in the media?
You can quote me on that.
Okay, good. Okay.
We saw federal education spending absolutely skyrocket. We saw scores barely move on the meter, if that's how we want to judge children's success. We saw a humongous increase in federal involvement in education and even more state meddling than is necessary. These two bills, which will ultimately morph into one bill, are supposedly trying to fix some of the problems of No Child Left Behind. But let me tell you, they are not worth the quote-unquote fixes that you will hear even Wyoming senators talk about, I think are not worth the paper they are written on.
Okay. See, I was under the impression that if No Child Left Behind was just that bad, then it was just going to be trash, just dumped. This was a bad idea. We're not going to do this. But I forgot a cardinal rule of Washington, D.C. Nothing ever dies. You just rename it, rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, and reintroduce it in the dead of night when nobody's paying attention.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And this is definitely a rearrangement of the deck chairs with a lot of subterfuge, a lot of lofty talking points that we are going to hear our United States senators, all disperse out to the far corners of the country and tell everybody why their yes vote was so important and what a great bill this is. Some of those talking points include, listen, this bill. So let me give you one of them. This bill will allow states to get out of the Common Core if they want to. And this bill will keep federal involvement out of the Common Core, these state standards that have been so highly controversial.
Well, wait a second. Let me back up on it real quick. I sent you an article early today, something that had passed the Senate, that essentially said if somebody wants to get out of some standardized testing, they can't. Parents can't. That's something somebody's trying to pass through Congress right now. Wouldn't that have everything to do with Common Core and just nullify what you just read there as a talking point?
It does. So that's this is another component. So on this opt-out issue, here's what we have. We have two very different versions in this bill. The Senate chose to not pass Senator Mike Lee's version, which mirrored a version that actually passed in the House by, I think it was called, his name is Representative Matt Salmon from Arizona. What that provision allows for, so the House version has it in, the Senate version does not. It allows parents to opt out of testing, and it allows the schools to not be dinged. In other words, what schools are going to be allowed to do is just simply not include those students in their participation numbers, because under state law, schools are required to have, I think it's like a 95% participation rate when they take these standardized tests. So this amendment, which I think the House version was a very good one, the House passed it, the Senate did not. As a matter of fact, the Senate was much more tight. They basically passed something that said along the lines of parents can opt out based on the state's laws. Well, that does Wyoming no good, because what we have right now is an attorney general's opinion about about parents opting out, that says parents can't opt out because, and they go back to the Wyoming Accountability Act, which by the way was mandated by the federal government, and they say that the attorney general says this is so important, this is so high stakes for the school districts that therefore these kids have to be drugged to school and have to be tested.
Okay, see, I didn't mean to get you off track here, but it just sounded to me like when you say, this can get you out of Common Core, but then they turn and say, oh, no, we might pass something that says you have to take standardized testing. It sounds like one cancels out the other, so something isn't true here.
That's right. One cancels out the other. And the issue with the Common Core, so if you hear those talking points, the question to ask is, well, how do states enforce that?
Right.
That's the question to ask. There is no enforcement. As much as we like to trust the federal government, what we have seen is that they renege on their own restraints. So the Congress has restrained itself in the past and said, we won't do this, and then they do it. So when we hear from, Senator Enzi, who voted yes, and Senator Brassica, who voted yes, if you hear them say, listen, Congress says we're going to stay out of this, the next question needs to be, so what enforcement does the state of Wyoming have if that doesn't happen? There is none in there. There's no teeth in there whatsoever.
Okay, so let's get back to your talking point. So we've cleared up the one, I think, about you can opt out of Common Core. What was next on the talking points?
Well, I wanted to kind of go down what these bills don't have, first of all. So they don't have a really strong, the House has a fairly strong opt-out provision, the Senate doesn't, and I fear when they go to conference, we're going to see that all swept away, because the Senate really has all the muscle. We didn't get block granting. There is no block granting in here for Title I funds. That was called the A+ Act. We wanted to see it come in as amendment. That was a no-go. So we're back to the same kind of funding for Title I funds with all the strings attached. And, as your listeners may know, Title I funds are those funds go to the state for our most vulnerable students. We don't have any real state involvement in the approval of the state plan. So when states receive Title I funds, they have to submit a state plan, and there's been a lot of discussion that, this is wonderful because now the feds are going to get out of this. And, well, they're only going to get out of it in as much as the Secretary of State, Arne Duncan, approved state plans. And this bill continues to give the U.S. Secretary of Education too much power over the approval or disapproval of a state's plan. We don't have the great language we wanted for enforcement of getting the federal government out of Common Core and other state standard schemes. And we hear a lot about this is a wonderful bill because it takes the federal government's involvement out of the accountability acts, out of these other things. Well, here's what I would say about that, Glenn. Just a little too little, a little too late. It's perfectly fine for the federal government to get out of the accountability movement now because, quite frankly, like Wyoming, states are already doing it. They had their arms twisted several years ago. They've now invested millions of dollars. The state of Wyoming has invested millions of dollars to create accountability systems. It doesn't matter one whit now that the federal government is saying, well, we're going to take our hands off this. These things are moving forward.
Okay. Now, let's get into a Common Core argument for just a moment. We'll get back to this. I hear from even people like Jeb Bush, well, Common Core was started by the state, so it's a state thing. So, it's okay because this is state control. This is not federal control. What's the problem with that argument?
Well, no one from Wyoming was involved in creating the Common Core.
Okay. And would you say then that there's been more of a federal takeover, or is this still under state control?
Yeah, we throw around, Jeb Bush throws around this idea that the states created the Common Core. Okay, Mr. Jeb Bush, name who in Wyoming created the Common Core. Tell me what teachers were involved in drafting it. Tell me did any teachers from Gillette sit down and discuss those standards? Did they get to have input on what should be and shouldn't be in there? That's the process that the state of Wyoming has used in the past to create standards. How did that happen? Because I love these lofty, we were involved. Simply because a national organization called the National Governors Association was involved in creating state standards does not mean that states were involved.
Right. Okay, now let's get back to No Child Left Behind, because we did officially come up with a label for it as, just so much suckage. So I think that's good. I think you should probably write that in your next paper for the Wyoming Liberty Group.
Okay.
Can we name?
I'll see if that gets past the
Yeah,
editors.
if it gets past your editors there, I'd be very surprised and proud of you if it got past your editors. So, okay. If you could name off, because I know you can do it with Common Core, so it should be pretty easy with No Child Left Behind. What exactly is the problem? Because it sounds like such a wonderful program. I even mentioned last hour, Head Start program sounds wonderful that we're going to give these kids a head start. But, years go by, $80 billion spent, and we run a test that shows that kids go through Head Start or kids not go through Head Start. They both turn out the same. There's no improvement. So my answer is, then why have the program? Just go ahead and shut it down. Can you name for us exactly what is wrong with No Child Left Behind?
It's a federal program.
Okay, no, we're done. Okay, thanks for calling. No.
I think that's about all I need. Exactly. It's a federal program. The federal government has no real ability to improve education at the state and local level. It simply hasn't happened. They have no track record of what do they run on other than they have the power of the purse strings. We've seen that. They've pumped millions and millions and millions, actually billions of dollars into the public education system using strings and incentives since the beginning of ESEA in 1965. And what do we have to show for that? We have very little. No Child Left Behind began a unbelievable upward curve of federal education, taxpayer spending in education, and we have little to nothing to show for it. So yes, it has been a failure of epic proportion, and yet here we continue down the road with more of the same thing. What the federal government should be doing is getting out of the way. As you said, they should be repealing these failing programs, and they should step away. But it's a big business, and they want to keep meddling in it.
And let's take a look at Common Core. And the one thing that I think both programs have in common, which is why, in part, we just can't seem to get rid of them, Amy, is, well, let's follow the money. So if we follow the money, where does this take us?
Well, federally, the U.S. spends around $920 billion, both state and locally, in education. So it's a lot of money. K through 12 is about $545 billion of that $900 billion total. It's a lot of money. As a matter of fact, in this reauthorization alone, we saw an amendment, and I believe it passed. I will have to check on that, Glenn. I'm almost positive it did, but I don't want to speak with absolute certainty because it just passed this afternoon, but there was an amendment to allow states to use a portion of their Title I funds for technologies. So for internet and, all the new emerging technologies that people want to see in the classroom, distance education, which would be something very new. And it could be used to go directly to consultants and to contracts for consultants, that sort of thing. The reality is public education is a very, very big business. If you want to sell a lot of new software, a lot of new books, a lot of new gadgets, you want to get into the emerging market of public education.
Okay, so that means a lot of lobbyists go to Washington, D.C. when it comes time to keep Common Core and keep No Child Left Behind on track.
Right.
Okay, now, what about, I know at one time, it's been a long time since we've talked about this. You were telling us about Common Core testing and the companies that provide those tests. Don't they make a lot of money on this?
Yeah, absolutely. The interesting thing about the Common Core was this is the first time that we saw a set of standards created by testing companies. And what we have seen happen in sort of the education bureau, the education business world, so the folks who create businesses and nonprofits to get involved in public education, what we've seen is those big businesses, textbooks, people like Pearson, those giants are now getting into the testing business. So they've morphed, they're adding new divisions in their companies and want to get very much involved in testing, which, to just the normal mind would think, gosh, doesn't that seem like a conflict of interest? So you're writing the textbooks and then you're writing the tests and you're involved in creating the standards, but then you're going to be on the other end supposedly writing the tests to see whether or not it's very incestuous, and it makes a lot of money.
Well, it seems like to me there would be an incentive then to just continue, like all bureaucracy, the incentive is to continue to grow the bureaucracy because that means more money comes in, and they can make sure that they keep their jobs with a nice big fat retirement and bonuses and so on. So if you're a company that writes tests for school districts, well, the more complicated, the more tests, the bigger you can make the bureaucracy in this, the more you can sell them. Then the more the company makes and the more the big CEOs walk away with their pockets filled.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And, like I said, there's going to be a lot of smoke and mirrors coming out of sort of the messaging of the passage of these two bills. And ultimately, I think the conference version as well, where we kind of hear that up is down and down is up. So we're going to hear a lot of things like, no, Glenn, what you just said is wrong. We're not trying to grow bureaucracy. We're actually trying to decrease. We're getting the federal government out of this. And they'll give the examples. Like I said, the Common Core example, we want the feds to get out of that. The accountability stuff, we're getting the feds out of that. So that's all great. Which, doesn't do a lot of help since states have already gone down the road and invested too much money to ever turn around now. The other thing they're going to talk about is testing and the amount of time spent testing. So the Senate version actually passed an amendment that would establish a limit on the maximum total time that a student spends taking standardized tests. And that sounds like a really great victory. And in a sense, it is, just in the teeny tiny sense. I mean, we are all weary of the testing. Testing does not truly measure what's happening with this child in their life and in their learning. But the flip side of that is that what this ultimately does is will continue to drive states to these state consortiums that were federally created that can guarantee minimum testing times because they have all this, it's online, it's computer generated, lots of software, and it will drive states away from state autonomy of their own tests. So Wyoming will not keep the pause test if the pressure is on them to decrease the to minimize the amount of time the student is at taking the test. The interesting thing about that is this mandate can only apply to the yearly state tests that the federal government requires. And that's what the pause is. The pause, like all the other states that have their state-based test, their statewide test, was all created under No Child Left Behind. That doesn't mean that students aren't going to be taking more tests, because they do. Your district administers all kinds of other tests. But states are going to be forced to go to these places where they can get the fastest, quickest test possible. And that ultimately erodes the state sovereignty over the test.
Okay, so it sounds like if we're dealing with state sovereignty here, because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, so where's the solution? So I guess the solution is somewhere or another get a hold of our state legislators, or are we looking somewhere else? Where do we go to convince people to get out of all of this?
No, absolutely. The state legislature right now, currently, the state is in the midst of looking. They have a task force, an assessment task force that's spending the summer looking at assessment and trying to make decisions about. I know our state superintendent has spoken that she would rather not move away from the pause test, but would rather keep that autonomy and stay away from SBAC, which is the Smarter Balanced Testing Consortium that Wyoming is under. Governor Friedenthal put us under that. Governor Meade continues to keep us in that. The superintendent, I believe, has said that she would like to stay with pause. I think there's going to be enormous pressure on the legislature to, number one, go for the test that has the minimum amount of testing time, and number two, go for a cheaper test. Education spending, this will be a whole other show, Glenn, but education spending is going to be a major issue come next February, given the projections for the state of Wyoming, how much money they're going to have to spend, and how dismal that looks. That's going to be a huge issue.
Okay. Amy, as always, thanks for coming on the program. Good to talk to you again.
Thanks, Glenn.